My name is Iain Patten. I'm a research consultant, so I work with groups and individual researchers to help them develop their thinking, essentially, and help them take that thinking forward into a contribution in their field. Research writing is really a process of giving people a clear, logical series of points that lead them from an interesting question to a meaningful answer. And so if we ask how it's related to the research process, it's in fact exactly the same process. You know, what we're trying to do with research is to identify the most interesting question within a field, and then we're trying to go through a series of steps that lead us to a meaningful answer. So what happens in research and in our own thinking process is that we often go down a few blind alleys. Our research is not a clean process necessarily, yeah? But what we communicate to other people is a much cleaner process. So maybe what we're talking about with research writing is a way of kind of cleaning up our thinking so that it can be presented in a very straightforward, logical series of steps that are going to take people from this starting point to an end point. If we're talking about a proposal, then really we're talking about the combination of right person, right question, right place. Yeah. So we need to look for every opportunity to get all of these points across. So very often in a proposal we have an element which is focused on the project itself, the proposed work. And we have an element which is focused more on the person who's going to do the work, and sometimes a separate element even on the environment that we intend to do the work in. And so what we can do is look for every opportunity always to combine these, even with an emphasis on one or the other. So we might think, okay, in a personal statement, the focus is on our history, perhaps, our curriculum, and we're kind of going through our experience, our knowledge, and so on. And so then what we can do is whenever we're talking about a particular skill or something, an achievement perhaps in the past, we can link it. We can remind people that this can be applied in the research that we're proposing in a particular way. Yeah? So we're emphasizing our personal experience and then linking it. Yeah? Then in the research proposal itself, in the proposed work, then we can be talking about the questions that we're trying to address and how we're going to go about doing that. And then we just take the opportunity to remind people that we have expertise gained in our previous work or in a different environment, and we can bring that in. So this part of the project will build on the expertise, or will exploit the expertise that I have from my postdoc work or whatever it is. Yeah? And then in terms of the environment that we're going to work in, we might find that there's a gap. So, you know, we have a good question, but we don't have all of the expertise that we need to address it. But maybe that's going to come from the environment that we're going to work in. So we can say, okay, this will use the skills that I will gain by working in this particular group, working at Human Technopole. So here I will collaborate with another group, or I will learn a technique or whatever it is, so that we end up again with the whole package. So that when somebody's looking at a proposal, they're always seeing, okay, we're focusing here on the person in a personal statement, but we also get information that reminds us that the question is good and interesting, and the environment that we're going to work in is going to help us do that. Yeah? Or we're looking at the proposed research and we get reminders that, oh yeah, but you know, he did that in his PhD, he developed this technique, or he's also now going to collaborate with this lab, and if you put those two things together, it's going to allow him to do some more powerful research or whatever, to address these questions that are coming through in the proposal. Yeah? So always linking all of these three together. Perhaps the most important thing that we think about when we're communicating a research story is having a meaningful answer to an interesting question. Yeah? If we don't have that, then we can forget about all of the details that are going to be communicated. The writing is not going to be effective. at least it's going to be very difficult to work with, tiring to read, and so on. So perhaps the most important thing is to first of all look at the correspondence between these two things. We need to make sure that we've defined the question precisely enough so that people find the answer satisfactory. Yeah? They can see that we've really made a contribution to the field. Then we need to think about why this question is interesting in the first place. So we're going to need to take people from what they already know about, what they're interested in, and lead them step by step through a process of reasoning that says, okay, if you're interested in this wider problem, then asking this more specific question or taking this particular approach can help us take a step forward. Yeah? And then we need to create a hierarchy of logic. So what I mean by that is that we can look at the story on many different levels. We can take a very quick version which says, okay, here's a problem which is interesting for these reasons, and I've answered it in this way. Okay, great. I'm convinced by that, but maybe I want to talk to you a little bit more later. Yeah? Now, if we have a bit more time or a little bit more space, then we can break that down. How am I actually going from this particular question to an answer? Okay, well, first of all, we have a more specific question that we need to deal with. So let's deal with that. And then having dealt with that, then that raises a new question, and so on and so forth. How do we break that down into steps? And then, of course, we can do the same thing. Once we've broken that down into steps, then we can break the steps down further. And so in terms of writing, written communication, then we go from the beginning and end, or the message of a paper and the question that a paper is addressing, through sections of the results or subsections of the results, and then into individual paragraphs and the relationship between them. And so when we see this kind of hierarchy in the structure, then it's much easier to navigate everything. Yeah? So having a clear answer to an interesting question, having an indication of why that question is interesting in the first place, and breaking down the process of answering it into a series of levels that can be looked at in more and more detail will allow us to structure the writing in a way that people can navigate easily. Generally, when we start thinking about writing something like a research article or a grant proposal, whatever it is, we're focused on what it looks like at the end. So usually, most of us, we know what a good article looks like or what a good proposal looks like, and we sit down and we try and achieve that, right? But we have very few steps to work with in between. We don't really know how to go from what's inside our head to what the final product looks like. And that's where it ends up being a very tiring process in which we can become focused too much on the details too quickly. Yeah? So a writing process is much more about being able to break down these steps into different elements, to break down how we get to the final product. Yeah? So if we understand, first of all, what it is that makes the final product effective, if we understand that people can navigate this on different levels, it's all about beginnings and ends, in fact. Yeah? The beginning and end of the whole piece of writing, a question and an answer, a problem and a proposed solution. Yeah? Okay, so now we can think about how we break that down. And we can see in the piece of writing, we can see these steps. First of all, within this wider problem, we have a more specific problem, and so on and so forth. So that means that we can understand now how to plan this process more easily. We can understand that the details don't really matter until we understand, until we can see how these steps are working. Yeah? So our first job is to do whatever it takes to get to a point where we can see on different levels these beginnings and ends, problem solutions, questions and answers. Yeah? So in terms of the actual process of getting there, it doesn't really matter. Yeah? For some of us, it might be easy or more natural to think very conceptually and say, okay, first of all, I'm going to think about the first step. What's the more specific problem here? What's the solution? How am I going to break that down? For some of us, that's too abstract. And so we can just start writing. But why are we writing? We're just drafting, we're just putting things down on the page to help us think more clearly, yeah? For the purpose of seeing this structure developing, yeah? And so that means that we're able to know why we're doing something at which point in time. Yeah? Instead of going from everything that's inside our heads to a complete piece of writing, we can say, okay, first of all, I want to see what the beginnings and ends are. How am I going to get there? For me, it's helpful to just take a piece of paper and start writing and see what comes out. Yeah? And when I see that, I start to get clearer about what the first point is, the second point, and so on. For others, I might start in a more abstract way. I might even get post-it notes and kind of move them around on a whiteboard or something like that. It doesn't really matter as long as we can see how to get the structure together. Yeah? So we can start to break down these elements. But in the end, it's the structure that really matters.